Hello, everybody. I'm Ian Casalicchio from the University of Palermo in Italy, and I welcome you to today's talk at Aberlin Ao Vivo. Aberlin Ao Vivo Linguistics Online is an initiative of the Brazilian Linguistics Association, and it is designed to give students and researchers free access to state-of-the-art discussions on the most diverse topics related to the study of human language. Our speaker today is Professor Roberta D'Alessandro from Utrecht University, which I had the pleasure to know personally first as leading researcher in our field and then as engaged boss in the project she's leading. Professor D'Alessandro is a full professor in syntax and variation at Utrecht University. After obtaining her PhD at the University of Stuttgart in Germany, she received a Marie Curie grant to do her research in Cambridge, and then became full professor of Italian language and culture at the University of Leiden. She stayed in Leiden until 2006, and in the same year, she was awarded a consolidator grant from the European Research Council for her project called Microcontact, Language Variation and Change from the Italian Heritage Perspective. Amongst her numerous publications, there is a monograph on impersonal C constructions in Italian, several edited volumes, and 2 articles in linguistic inquiry, one on the modular phrase impenetrability condition with Tobias Scher, and one on movement and agreement in Italian past participles with Ian Roberts. But Professor D'Alessandro's impact goes beyond linguistics in the narrow sense. On the one hand, she was a representative of the younger members of the academia, since she was part of the Global Young Academy and of the Young Academy of Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Science. On the other hand, she is committed to the dissemination of our knowledge about languages. For example, with the webpage Linguistica in Pillole, which targets a general Italian-speaking audience, and to issues about ethics and codes of practice in the academia, such as gender equality. Well, today, she will talk about microcontact, language change in contact from a microvariational perspective. So we'll discover more about her ERC-funded project and its first results. Grazie, Roberta, for being here today. Before giving you the floor, I remind the audience that questions can be written in the Aberlin chat. I will then read them out for you after the end of the talk. You can write your questions during the talk or after the question time begins. So, prego, Roberta, a te la parola.
Okay, grazie Jan. Thank you very much, muito obrigada for inviting me to Miguel Oliveira and Aberlin. I would like to thank you really wholeheartedly for all you're doing for open science and open access linguistics. This is really fantastic, so I'm honored to be here today. Yes, like Jan said, Jan was a member of the project. I'll tell you a little bit about my project. And the project is ongoing. We are about 3 years in. We have some results. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what these are. I'm going to share my screen now, so we can start. Just a second. Let's hope that okay. So the project is called, as I told you, as Jan told you actually, Microcontact. Microcontact is about language change in contacts from a microvariational perspective. I'm very happy to talk about this because it also involves Brazil. We have a session in Brazil, and we have fieldwork in Brazil, so I want to show you some results. So in this talk, I'll tell you a little bit about heritage languages, meaning languages spoken by the children of immigrants, and in particular, children of Italian immigrants in Brazil, in Argentina, and in the United States, and in Canada, mainly. I'll tell you a little bit about contact and microcontact and what I mean by that, and I'll give you some examples of the syntax of microcontact. Normally, when you study contact linguistics, syntax is it is a bit, well, not recently it is taken up, but syntax is a bit forgotten. It is the forgotten little sister. And I want to tell you a little bit more about syntax, and we'll go to discuss the big picture. But I want to start from the conclusions so that you know what you're missing if you have to go to cook or to eat, or if you just say, this is too long. You already know the conclusions. The conclusions are that when you are when you are confronted with change in contact, when there are two or more languages that enter in contact, there are two main strategies for conflict resolutions. One is a strategy which involves grammar. Grammar intended even like language. We go with language-specific transfer of structures, in particular for syntax, and what happens is what we normally know happens, and what is reported largely and widely in all the literature on changing contact. But there's also a cognitive strategy, so we need to separate them. There is a strategy which is at work when, in particular, speakers are not able to perceive the point of variation, when they feel that grammars are distant from each other, when they have some sort of perceived typological difference, when they perceive the typological difference, then what happens is whatever we know from the literature, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. But when they have no way of perceiving the distance, either because the distance is too wide, as it might be the case in creoles, or because the distance is too narrow, as it is basically in two dialects of the same macro grammar, or in two systems like the Romance languages that are very similar in some respects. Now, when they can't perceive it, then they have to resort somehow, when they have to talk, the thing they anchor their grammar to is some salient cognitive elements, such as linking. I'll call this linking, but in particular, I'll tell you about topicality and indexicality. This is more or less the general idea, but I want to show you actually what we did in this project. Some terminology in the beginning. First, UG, I don't need to tell you. By UG, I need L0, so the stage at which humans are before they start learning a language. The faculty of language is the ability to, say, master these extremely complex systems that are languages. It is the language organ. And then there are third factor elements, which are something I would like to discuss a little bit at the end. Chomsky gives a definition of third factor elements as cognitive factors that are encoded in language, but are not exclusive to language. They're not exclusive to the faculty of language. And they are, for instance, data processing or architectural, computational, developmental constraints. There are all sorts of things that are in language, of course, because we're studying language, we're studying languages and language, but they are not exclusive to language. And the issue is, are these elements that we find over and over and over again as, let's say, driving or leading syntactic change, are these things language specific, or are they just third factor elements that we see over and over again in language? And I will make some considerations about this. But first, I want to show you what these things are. Heritage languages, as I told you, are very much in fashion nowadays, so I'm very happy to talk about them. By heritage languages, I mean languages spoken in particular by a minority in a family context. And these languages are usually not shared by the majority around the people who speak these heritage languages. In particular, today, I will refer to heritage Italo-Romance, and I'll tell you in a bit which ones exactly. Basically, languages that are spoken by Italian immigrants that moved to the Americas, North and South America, and they kept speaking the language in small communities or in family, but they were surrounded by other languages. Crucially, these other languages are Romance. And that's why you see Microcontact. Now, about heritage languages, much has been said, and in particular, there are some generalizations that we know are quite widely attested. One is, for instance, avoid indeterminacy. These are some sort of principles that guide heritage language development, let's say. The first one is avoid indeterminacy. If an item has several functions, you pick one. Heritage speakers pick one of them. Imagine in Romance, a is a word that has several functions. In most Romance languages, a is used for the dative, it is used for the locative, it is used for differential object marking, it is used for several uses. Well, normally heritage language speakers pick one, because they don't really like indeterminacy. There is a very famous interface hypothesis that says that actually the more grammatical modules are involved in a phenomenon, the more vulnerable this phenomenon will be to change. So everything that involves not just syntax or not just phonology, but the syntax pragmatics interface or syntax in general, how can I say, the conceptual, intentional, but also the performance, the sensory motor system, the articulation, everything that involves more than one module, grammar internal or grammar wide, so between language and other cognitive systems, these are the phenomena that are more prone to change. These are more sensitive to change. And I will tell you about null subjects in particular, that, or also differential object marking, that touch upon several modules. So they are supposed to change when they are in contact. And then avoid silent elements. Basically, reconstructing the reference, understanding the reference of silent elements is not easy, because we don't really know when we have a null element, we have to reconstruct who or what this element refers to. That's not straightforward, which means that heritage speakers tend to avoid silent elements. I will not talk about all the issues related to complete or incomplete language acquisition, etc. That's not my problem in this talk. These are just strategies that we know are at work. Now, there are two important models that I would like to refer to at some point. And these are models of transfer, what exactly a language takes from another language. These are both models that target L3 acquisition. So basically you're a speaker, you have an L1, your native language, and you have an L2 that you've learned, whichever it is. And then what happens in L3? Now, one famous model is Jason Rothman's typological primacy model that I will be referring to a lot. And according to this model, basically, what is transferred to L3 is comes from the language which is holistically more structurally similar. So this means that if you have an L1 and L2, and imagine L1 is a Romance language, Italian, L2 is English, and L3 is, again, Spanish, you will be transferring from Italian to L3, from your L1. But if the situation is reversed, then you have English as your native language, then you have Italian as a second language, and then you're learning Spanish, you will still, again, transfer from Italian, because Italian is typologically more similar. And in particular, it is perceived to be so by the speakers. I will not give specific definitions of this, but just as an operational definition, something which is perceived similar, because the lexicon is very similar, because the structures are very similar. And that's how you transfer. Now, there's also the model of linguistic proximity that has been proposed by Marit Westergaard. And this model actually is about the fact that, well, you don't really worry about the typological, holistic, general picture, but you actually transfer structure by structure in a language. And these two models seem to be conflicting. But in fact, I hope I will show that they are not, if you consider the right dimension of language change. Now, the question that I started with for this project was, do these generalizations about heritage languages hold across the board? And what do they tell us about language? In particular, I was puzzled about the fact that most studies have to do with two languages at a time. And these languages are usually very different and very distant from each other. Some are less distant, some are more distant, but normally what you see in heritage language studies is Korean and English, or Spanish and English, or Russian and English. That's because most of these heritage studies, in particular concerning syntax, are in the US, are set in the US, and because there are a lot of immigrants, etc. So it is very easy to find these couples of languages. But I was wondering what happens if a language is very similar, if a Neapolitan emigrates in Argentina, where they basically speak Neapolitan with an accent. Is it the same? Do we have the same results or not? Now, we need to distinguish, therefore, between macrocontact, these are working definitions. I cannot give you the numbers. I cannot tell you how a language can be. I thought of every possibility of measuring distance between languages. But now, operationally, if a language is distant from the other, meaning in this talk, they belong to a different language family, and they're typologically distant enough, such as Korean and English, for instance, but also Spanish and English in a way, that we talk about macro contact. We talk about contact between two distant, different grammars. When instead you have contact between two languages or two dialects or two varieties of the same macro grammar, as we can consider Romance, at least as far as the phenomena that I'm interested in are concerned, when you talk about that, then you're talking about microcontact. As I told you, Spanish and Neapolitan, they're very similar. They share a lot of phenomena. Differential object marking, which is one of them, is really basically the same. The difference being that in Spanish, you have definiteness and animacy, and in Neapolitan, you only have animacy, for instance. Or Abruzzese, which is yet another variety, you have differential object marking precisely like Neapolitan and Spanish, except you have it only for first and second person. So there is this micro difference, but basically differential object marking is there. It is part of the grammar. In that case, we talk about microcontact. And the question is changing contact the same? Do you have the same output of language contact when you have microcontact and microcontact? And the answer is no, not at all. Now, when you want to observe changing contact, normally what you do is you study a phenomenon A in a heritage language, for instance. You create the stimuli, you try acceptability judgments, you have all sorts of things, then you check the production, you can check the comprehension, and then you can say, okay, you have the hypothesis H, this hypothesis works or doesn't work. You normally look at the output and try to understand what caused it, because there's no other way. So it is very hard to understand change while it is happening, to see it while it is happening. And also it is quite different. It is quite difficult to, I remember a quote by Eichenwald that said, most of the times you don't know whether change has happened because of contact or it would have happened anyway, spontaneously. Sometimes another famous way of seeing this is, you hear it over and over again, changing contact is just an acceleration of what would happen independently in diachrony. But that's not quite correct, actually, and we found a lot of discrepancies. But ideally, you would have to check all these dimensions against each other. So is there a better way? Well, if there would be, you would have to select one feature, for instance, and see it in contact with the same feature with slightly different values, but not once, not a one-to-one contact, but one-to-many. And also check at the same time whether the diachrony of this feature is the same of the contact output. So you need a lot of different languages in contact that have the same feature and are also very well documented. Now, so we would need 2 or 3 more marked phenomena observable in diachrony, in contact with similar phenomenon within grammars that are exactly the same, but for that phenomenon that we're checking. And then we need to have grammars that come in contact at the same time with the same social, linguistic, and historical conditions, because we know that a lot of the output of language contact is determined by socio-historical factors, not just by grammar. So you would have to rule them out, you would have to factor them out, but to factor them out, they have to be identical. So this way you can really follow and check what happens. You're putting changing contact under the microscope, but it is very hard to find such a situation. This is what we need. In other words, over and over again, feature X in grammar A in contact with grammar B, grammar C, grammar D, and grammar E, where C and D perhaps have the same value for this A, for this feature X, whereas grammar A and grammar E have slightly different value. And also look at it in isolation. Can you do this? Yes, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be telling you. And this is the optimal way, and it is very rare. The condition that the open lab that we have is offered by Italo-Romance varieties, and also other Retro-Romance. In the meantime, many others have added, but the original idea was to check Italo-Romance varieties, because Italians are very well known in the world to be emigrants. Italy is a country of emigrants, and there have been several waves. And in particular, there's been the wave between the two world wars and the one after the Second World War that brought a lot of millions of people out of Italy. Now, these people moved more or less within the same period. They had the same level of instruction. They had the same poverty and misery and desire to go and learn a new language. So the social linguistics and historical situations were really comparable with each other. And they left from all linguistic areas of Italy. As you know, the official language of Italy is Italian, but there are many other Italo-Romance languages spoken. So every color corresponds to a different language or language group. So Sicilian is as far from Tuscan, which was the basis for Italian, but in the Middle Ages. Now it has developed its own grammar, etc. So it is as distant from Tuscan as it is from French or from Spanish. Actually, maybe it is closer to Spanish than to Tuscan. So there are a lot of, these are all Italo-Romance, these are all languages. So we picked these languages that you see here because they have the phenomena that we're looking for. We took one Veneto, we took one Piemontese. They are not exactly the same, but they are the same for the phenomenon that we're looking at, or similar, comparable. They all both have it, subject lytics. Then we took Napolitan, and then we took Abruzzese, and then we took Palermitan, and we took Salentino, and then we also decided to take Fiorentino and Senese. Actually, in the end, we ended up doing other languages because we couldn't find many people, etc. But anyway, that was the original intention. And these languages all enter in contact with French in Quebec, with Spanish in Argentina, with Italian in Italy, because Italian started being learned heavily after this migration, after the Second World War. That's when Italians started speaking Italian. With Portuguese in Brazil, and also we added English because that's the only language. The United States is the only country where Italian immigrants have been studied, and their Italian has been documented. So we put English as a control group. And so the social linguistics and the social historical conditions are the same. We can still observe optional structures in first generation immigrants. So we can still see and go and interview the people who first left Italy, who are now around 80. This is not 80 or 90 even. We found them. We didn't know in the beginning whether we could find them. We did. We found them, their children and then their grandchildren. Finding the entire families was really hard. We didn't find many of them, but we did find first generation, second generation, third generation. So we could track the change, how it developed. Now, the first step was to find the speakers. And how do you find the speakers? Well, it is not extremely easy to find speakers in another continent. We thought, okay, let's ask Italian Institute of Cultures, associations, everything, let's ask them to contact the youth of Italian communities, because we had no idea and no contact, and these varieties are not documented. There are associations. There is Italian in Brazil. There are the associations of, I don't know, San Rocco di Orsoña in Argentina, or in America, but it is not easy to find them. So we said, okay, let's try with crowdsourcing. Let's see if they can. So the message was, please go record some elderly people in your community and upload this on our interactive website. I'd like to let you see or listen to some of these. To do this, I need to actually, I think, stop sharing this and start sharing something else. The project. Okay, let's see if I can share this. I hope you can see it, this is our interactive atlas, and actually this you can participate and upload things and show recordings. I have no time, but if you're interested, you can ask me then later. Every one of these colors is a different Italo-Romance variety. Actually, these ones we populated the lists in America. The Italians were very reactive, but in America it was really hard. But then we went on fieldwork. The intention was, let's find the people with the right profile and then we go on fieldwork. But we actually had to find these people by going there. And you get, let's see what we have here. For instance, we have from Federico Westphalen, we have some Italian speaker. And you can hear it. This is Brazilian, and you can hear the story.
E allora così, tanti giutea pupa mama fare i lavori, gli affari che avete fare in colonia, in campagna, no? Tante volte si lavora, si sapeva, si c'è roncon anche la manara, tagliare solo le piante.
Okay, so this is just for you, for your curiosity. If you want, you can still go and let's go. You can go and take a look at our website, at this atlas. The software for this atlas is open access. So in case you're planning on big mass of data crowdsourcing, please contact me because I'll tell you where to find it. It is all open access. Anyway, it's a lot of fun to hear these people and to hear what their stories. But as you've heard, this person was a speaker of Veneto, but it sounded Portuguese. To my ears, I couldn't quite get what he was saying. So this was, I could tell you forever all kind of problems we got, because our group is pretty big. I'll tell you in a minute. Actually, this is the group of people who are working or have worked in the project. And I'll tell you how we organized it. But you have to remember that many of these people emigrated 60 years ago. So they speak a very old, archaic variety of some local dialect, and they've been in contact with another language. So understanding what they're saying is already quite a challenge. This is the team. The people that are smaller here, one of them is Jan, as you can see. They are smaller not because we don't like them, but because they left the project. You've heard they found jobs elsewhere, as normally happens with postdocs, and Julian is actually our technician. So at the moment, it is just us, the big ones, working on them, and each one of us is responsible for a country, and for a country, it's just quite big. And for a language. So for instance, Alberto is responsible for Brazil. He has carried out, at least he was planning on going on the second fieldwork, but then COVID struck and we are now stuck because our second fieldwork cannot be carried out. But he's responsible for Northern Italian, in particular Veneto, and then Friulian, because we found a lot of Friulian data speakers, and Brazil. So each one of us is responsible for a language, an Italian language, and one of the countries, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, and United States. In the meantime, some varieties have fallen off, like Tuscan, we couldn't find speakers. We added Calabrian because there are many speakers. We added Friulian because we found many speakers, and these are postdocs that work also with us. But there's a lot. You can imagine the amount of work that this has taken. So it took us quite a while to start working. Now, how did we do it? The first fieldwork was last year, and the way we carried it out more or less was we first tried to establish the language environment via free conversation, where they told us their stories of when they arrived in the new countries, of when they were young, etc. And they are all on the atlas now. Then we tried to check. So we had a questionnaire, and we had a HALA test. This has been given to us by the group in the University of Hawaii, very kindly. And this is a test for proficiency level. We didn't actually quite make it to do everything all the time. And we asked with questionnaires. Questionnaires were not written. They had to hear some stimuli, and they were recorded in the speaker's native language. And we texted about, well, we had a lot of different questions. We had different tasks: forced choice, repetition, interactive tasks, or complete the sentence. These people, most of these people, first generation speakers, had really hard time interacting with the computer, understanding the tasks. So we had to think of all sorts of strategies. We have several papers on that if you're interested. This is what was more or less what a Sicilian speaker would hear.
Ora vi facciamo ascoltare due frasi e andate a vedere chi da che vi pare meglio tra i due.
These are instructions in the language. They're instruction in Sicilian for the Sicilian speakers, because we didn't want to use Italian in the meantime, because Italian interferes, it's a third language. Most of these speakers don't even speak Italian. And this was a stimulus, two sentences, and you pick the one that you like.
Ti sunnaste cavasaste idra. Ti sunnaste cavasaste idra.
This is a differential object marking. One was idra, another one is idra. And it is so many of these different ways, and we did get something, but it was quite a lot of work. Okay, this is more for the deixis. We really had a lot of the hardest of times. The only thing that worked was really taking an object, putting it next to the speaker, and say, so this is, because everything that had to be recognized through the screen wasn't so easy. So close to me, close to you, and understanding that you are the person who's speaking, etc. That wasn't very straightforward for most of the elderly speakers. The second fieldwork, where we were ready to leave, it was planned for March and April and May this year, but you know what happened. So we had to resort to data collection via internet, and this was actually possible. It turned out to be possible because we had a lot of contacts, at least for the grammatical phenomena. When it was about deixis and indexicals, we couldn't do it. Actually, we had to cancel that, and we can't just do it via screen. I will not go through this again because I want to tell you a little bit about grammar and what we actually did. Oh, these are the number of speakers that we found and that we interviewed. 50 in Brazil, 74 in Argentina, 36 in Canada, 58 in the US. And we also added Belgium because the social linguistic situation of Belgium and of Italian speakers in Belgium, Italians in Belgium, is more similar to that of Italians in the US and Argentina and Brazil than that of Italians in the US. The Italians in the US are really a group on a side. The language is completely different. They created a different kind of language. So it is really not comparable. Sorry, but aside from this, Canada is the problem. Canada, most of Italians in Canada are actually trilingual with English. So English interferes all the time. It is not pure. Whereas in Belgium, in the Wallonian part, there is no other language. It is French and these Italian languages. There are more. So with fieldwork, we also found some. When we only elicited some specific phenomena for Italy, we had a lot. We had, for instance, only for subject lytics, then for the spontaneous conversations, we have more than 500 to 600 sentences. So we have a lot more than these. These are the ones that responded to the questionnaire. Then there's a lot of data coming from spontaneous speech that we also took into account. Okay, let's go quickly into what we found. There are some empirical generalizations about heritage languages that have been drawn on the basis of language pairs, as I told you, in Microcontact. For instance, no subjects in contact are supposed to get lost or get weakened. People tend to insert overt subjects when they learn a second language or when they are also heritage speakers. Differential object marking, so the marking of the object when it is animate or definite, that weakens too. So normally, if you have a language like Russian that has differential object marking, heritage speakers tend to use it a bit less. Deixis, indexicality, pronominal systems, they are claimed to be not affected by contact. So the pronouns, they don't change because of contact. If they change at all, they change diachronically. And then also the highest functional heads, the ones that encode indexicality, but in particular tense, D and C in syntax, so the complementizer, the definiteness, and the determiner head, sorry, and the tense head, they're supposed to stay because they are linking the discourse to their indexicals. And the claim is that they are resilient to change. They are not dropped. So what we found is null subjects in contact, no, they actually don't get lost at all in our microcontact situation. Differential object marking even gets created where it wasn't there. So it is a completely different kind of results. Deixis indexicality actually, yes, is not affected by contact at all. Same in macro and micro contact. And the highest functional heads, well, we found a lot of droppings, but in macro contact. You need to know, so we checked every one of these languages in contact with all the languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, etc. But we also checked them, remember, with English. So we had the same tests also in the US, and they actually pattern with what has been found so far. So say this Veneto in contact with English in the US behaves exactly like Russian in contact with English in the US. So it is not, we wanted to make sure that we're testing the same things. So there is something there that is related to microcontact, to the fact that the languages, when the languages enter into contact, that are very similar to each other, typologically basically the same, change results in, has different outcomes. So, okay, this is what I just told you, we can skip it. So let's look at null subjects in contact quickly. Pro-drop, so if you have one language which is pro-drop in contact with a non-pro-drop language, you have two possible logical options. One is you insert overt pronouns in pro-drop, in the extra pronouns in the pro-drop language, or you extend the pro-drop to the non-pro-drop, like English would become non-pro-drop, one of the two. Actually, what has been attested mostly is that, as I told you, you insert overt elements where in the baseline or in the original grammar from the country, let's say that I cannot get the number, but the language spoken in Italy, the English variety, the homeland, variety, where they have pro-drop, you insert a subject. That's what's usually been attested. The extension of pro-drop, so the fact that languages become pro-drop, that's also been attested, but to a minor extent. Since this has been attested much less, it has been claimed, well, it is considered to be some sort of exception, but it is there. And it has been attested, for instance, for Spanish in the US, so it is a possible strategy. It is just less, it is found to a minor extent. Now, so the interface hypothesis is what I already told you. Basically, I just repeat it quickly for you. If more than one module is involved in a phenomenon, if you have to, that phenomenon is very is prone to change. It will change. For instance, null subjects, why do you lose pro-drop? Because pro-drop involves so many different things. It involves it violates, let's say, avoid indeterminacy. Because if you have a pro, you don't really know who the referent is. It violates the interface hypothesis because you drop the subject under specific grammatical conditions, yes, but also under specific discourse conditions. And it violates avoid silent elements. So basically, you shouldn't be doing pro-drop if you are a heritage speaker. And that's what they found so far, except we found something completely opposite. This is not so important. What we found is, this is the study mainly carried out by Alberto Frasson, who, as I told you, went to Brazil in particular, but he's also checking the other varieties. The data I give you here are taken from a talk that has been given recently to the Heritage Syntax, to Heritage Language Syntax workshop. You can write to Alberto for the paper in case. Because I think the talk is no longer online, but what Alberto and Breche Fanos found, that's what they interviewed. They interviewed 3 generation 1 speakers in Argentina, 5 generation 2 heritage speakers in Argentina, 7 generation 3 heritage speakers in Brazil. That's the age from 57 to 93. And also they checked 580 sentences of spontaneous production, because they were checking subjects, and of course subjects are in every sentence. So every sentence you have, you can see if there's a subject. In particular, they checked SCLs, which are subject clitics. Subject clitics are present in Friulian. They are agreement-like in Friulian. This means that they are agreement-like. They are not pronominal. There are a lot of tests that I show you, but there's no time for that. You have to take my word for that. These are like agreement endings. You have to consider the subject clitics like agreement, not like full pronouns in Friulian in Italy. So they checked what happened to these subject languages. They have two tasks, forced choice and also spontaneous production and grammaticality judgment. The contexts, they checked whether speakers of Friulian, heritage Friulian, would double, so would insert a subject clitic when it was doubling pronominal subjects and lexical subjects, when they would double topicalized subjects, and whether they would be repeated in conjunction. This is one of the tests that distinguishes between agreement clitics and pronominal clitics. When you have pronominal clitics, you can drop the second instance. That's actually, if you think about it, the only instance in which you can have prodrop in English. When you say you eat and drink, you don't need to say you eat and you drink. And that's because you in English is a pronoun. When you have these subject clitics in the baseline variety, you have to repeat them for every instance of the verb, because these are really like agreement. The results are that in sentences where you see no, so no cluster, when they're clitics in isolation, basically, heritage speakers tend to have less subject clitics. They omit the subject clitics. Okay, you can say this is because subject clitics are by accident omitted, but actually what Alberto Frasson showed in his paper, oh sorry, I didn't put, I think page was 18 and then it got, my computer got frozen. But what he found what he showed actually is that these clitics are different from the original clitics in Italy, because they have become pronouns. They have become pronominal. And he made a lot of tests to check that. So these clitics are no longer agreement. They have become pronominals. They are becoming pronominals. So they are still optionally used as pronouns of agreement. They're becoming pronominal. And the moment they are pronouns, they get dropped. That's what they found. What Alberto found is actually what is happening is, and also Jan found something similar because Jan was working with us at this. Basically, you have two steps. First, agreement becomes pronouns, and then these start getting dropped, which means that actually prodrop is being created, is in a variety where there wasn't. It was a completely different kind of prodrop, let's say. So this is a new prodrop. And in particular, the contexts are DP, doubling, no subject, etc., more likely to produce clitics in topic shift than in topic continuity. So in other words, in the case in which you're talking about something, you are reintroducing something that you've already discussed, when you have topic in the very basic primitive meaning of old information, you drop the subject. That's what they found. So basically, topic continuation enhances subject, no subjects in this variety and in all instances. So it's exactly the opposite of what we normally find in contact. Interim conclusions, microcontact. So why is this? So all these generalization, avoid indeterminacy, avoid silent elements, interface conditions, etc. All these, they are not met. But why? Well, because we are in microcontact. That's really mostly because the moment you do it with English, then it works. So actually, this means that we are in microcontact, and a key feature over and over again seems to be topicality. In particular, the expression of topic as given, the traditional expression of topic as given. So not only do heritage speakers master topicality, so they don't have any trouble with the interface, they actually use it in novel ways. That's why I say change enters through topicality, because topicality is something they have. And that's probably because they attach to their cognitive basis. Differential object marking quickly. we expect differential object marking to decrease, to disappear. It has been reported over and over again that even with speakers that do not have any trouble with datives or accusatives, with marking of indirect case, whatever you want, differential object marking disappears, is reanalyzed, it is weakened. For several reasons. Avoid ambiguity is the first one. You need extra syntactic knowledge, you need topicality, you need animacy, you need the interfaces. So differential object marking is another prototypical phenomenon that should disappear. It doesn't. Historically, we already have some attestation of Neapolitan in contact with Spanish where differential object marking was reinforced. They are very similar. We also have some attestation of Catalan. Catalan has differential object marking only with pronouns and with dislocated DPs. But in fact, in those areas that are in heavy contact, all the areas are in contact with Spanish, but Catalan is developing differential object marking in situ, which means that it is expanding. Differential object marking is expanding. Now, one thing I left is the diachrony. Of course, all these varieties that we picked are varieties, except for Abruzzese that I picked because I am a speaker of Abruzzese and I do research on that. All these varieties have written tradition. They are attested, so we can check what happened in the past, but there's no time for that. We need another talk. Now, differential object marking in microcontact. So differential object marking when Venetan, Friulian, Abruzzese, Sicilian are in contact with these Romance languages. These are Romance languages, but they all behave differently with respect to differential object marking. So Venetan and Friulian do not have it normally. Abruzzese has it only for first and second person. Sicilian has it all over the place. They are in contact. You see, microcontact is beautiful with all these languages that offer all sorts of different options. Brazilian Portuguese has no differential object marking. Rio-Platense Spanish has more than Spanish, Peninsular Spanish. It has it all over the place. French doesn't have it, Italian doesn't have it, but they are typologically similar, more or less. There's a lot to say. There's no time to say it, but the VP is more or less the same. What we found is that differential object marking remains stable. It is even created where it wasn't there originally. So Friulians start using differential object marking in Brazil with topics. So this is these are the data. These are data from Luana Sorgini. That's her PhD project. If you want to see all the data, etc., they are online in the. Well, they are in the literature. Later, I'll tell you where to find these things. It's very exciting. She worked a lot with all varieties from all Italo-Romance. Calabrian and Friulian, this is the case study that she presented, but she checked everything. And basically, Friulian in Argentina, well, here you cannot see very well, but you can see that, well, speakers chose the differential object marking more often with pronouns, but in particular, I want you to focus your attention on that speakers chose the differential object marking option in topic position. Here, so the red is differential object marking. This is the topic. And the yellow is a non-differential object marking. These are different. These are heritage language speakers, and there is an increase with respect to this is the full DP, and these are the pronouns. So with pronouns, you have many more. Generation 1 even started introducing differential object marking with topics and with pronouns. Even the immigrants, people that went there. The fathers, people, 50% of full DPs in situ are marked for differential object marking, and 92% of full DPs in topic are marked for differential object marking. So differential object marking, and this is no news. Also, Italian is developing differential object marking with first and second person pronoun. So, but it is in topic. So once again, there is no erosion at all in those varieties that have it, and there's increase of differential object marking, even creation in those varieties that have it. Quickly about deixis, as I told you, there's no change. Indexicals, pronouns, etc. Pronouns are totally not affected by contact. They stay the way they are. Demonstratives, there is a decrease. So this is the work by Silvia Terenghi. She's working on deixis and indexicals. In particular, this is again her talk in the Heritage Language Syntax conference. This is, you can see that this is because she uses LaTeX, so it's a different kind of format. That's her work. You can find it there. She looked at ternary demonstrative systems, so this close to me, this close to the addressee, and that far from both, from speaker and addressee. What she found is that, in fact, when you have the systems that are in between, so refer to the addressee more or less, so the medial, the red is where there's non-target response. So basically what happens is the systems from tripartite, close to the speaker, close to addressee, far from both, let's say more or less to make it simplified, they're going to a dyadic system, bipartite, with speaker addressee or speaker far from speaker. There are several, but they're decreasing. The thing is, okay, you say there has been an effect. But there has been an effect, which is exactly the same effect that you see in diachrony. So she tracked everything that happened in diachrony, and in fact, it is exactly the same. So there's nothing new, which is not the same for the other two phenomena. So actually, deixis, indexicality, is stable, and we know this. We know that person is stable. It's not affected by change. We know this from the work by Polinsky, by several people. So there's nothing new. It is not a contact-induced development. So indexicals are not affected by contact. I will skip this, but I'll just tell you, go and look at this work. This is work Gigi Andriani is doing our postdoc with New York, Broccolino kind of variety. This is a completely different language. This is Microcontact, because it's Italo-Romance and English. First, all the other tests, but also what Gigi found is that there is heavy drop of D, T, and C heads. So there is drop of these heads contra what we normally expect. But for the rest, these varieties in Microcontact behave very well, exactly as we expect. Now, to sum up, in Microcontact, no subjects are weakened or rarely stay unaffected. Normally, you insert overt subjects. In Microcontact, they stay unaffected or they are even strengthened. You start dropping the subject where it wasn't dropped before. Now, extreme Microcontact, I didn't tell you, but there are patterns in creoles that resemble what we found in Microcontact. So there are two strategies, basically, I'll tell you, and you find them in creoles. Creoles seem to pattern sometimes more with Microcontact than with Macrocontact. And that's strange because creoles are extreme Macrocontact. Differential object marking in Macrocontact, so English, Korean, is or Russian is weakened. In Microcontact, it is strengthened, and in extreme Macrocontact can exist. So it is different from, the reaction is different from the Macrocontact pure. And deixis and indexicals are basically unaffected. So let's go back to a quick discussion about this. So why is that? We've noticed that basically there are two things. When things go wrong in our data, when they go different from Microcontact, they always rely on topicality. So differential object marking starts with topics. No subjects start getting dropped when they are topics. So topicality is underlyingly there in the varieties. So, and indexicality is also there. In fact, indexicality is not even touched. We have to distinguish between topics being the locus of change and topics informing change. So we've always thought of, okay, speakers cannot understand topics. That's why they cannot produce no subject. No, that's not the point. Or at least in these varieties, they do show clear mastery of topics. Topics are there. Topics are actually believed to be universal, and they are there. They're just not used to express something, or they are. Now, topicality and indexicality are kinds of linkers. So what we could think of, is topicality, indexicality, they link your reference to something that you've already said before, topics, or something that is around you, deictics. Now, when speakers, as I told you before, speakers borrow more readily from the language that is perceived to be more typologically similar. So typological similarity and perceived typological similarity, perceived structural similarity is a thing. When speakers can't perceive it because it is so small, like two dialects or two micro varying parts of grammar, of this basically the same macro grammar of Romance, then what do? They resort to what language gives them, which is topicality or indexicality, which is different from what they do when they perceive the similarity. They perceive the locus of change, and then they can borrow. Of course, this is all unconscious, but that's how we think it works. Now, linking is the core. Linking, if this linking, is this language? Or, excuse me, or is it the third factor phenomenon? Is this cognition, pure cognition? Excuse me. I'm almost finished. It is not clear. The answer is not clear. Topics are claimed to be universal. There's a study on typological study that says that every language has it. Krivka made a lot of studies showing that the idea, the basic idea of given and new, old and new or something, this is universal probably. But is this specific to language or not? Well, topicality, if anything, makes things more difficult. If you are updating information, if you're restricting information structure. Also, when you look at information, and that's what Krivka did, you basically see that the way information is stored is not by topic, what is known and what I say about it. It is basically lists. So it is not very clear that topics are there for information structure. For communication, they probably are. Are they just reflected in language, or are they actually specific to language? It seems to be the case that this idea of informing, so giving a base and updating information, restricting the common ground, is actually perhaps unique to language. So this could be something that is part of the faculty of language, which is nothing new, but Bickerton has the same idea for Creole. So basically what happens is there are two strategies. These are the conclusions I started with. If you perceive, the speaker perceives the distance, the difference, then you go and do, you go for interface restrictions, avoid ambiguity, you do all these things, and this is one strategy. There's also another strategy, though, that comes out only when there's nothing else they can rely to, because they can't even see that if they think they're basically speaking the same grammar. This is unconscious. And what you do is you basically start from what you have, for what the faculty of language gives you, and you build on that. And these strategies are both visible in Microcontact for those which we considered exceptions, like the data from Montrul or other data. These are not exceptions. These are just instantiation of the second strategy. And in Microcontact there, that's basically the only strategy when you are within the same language. And then in Creoles, you have both strategies. This is all I have to say. Thank you very much for your patience. This is a project from the European Union, etc. I need to acknowledge the ERC. But I'd like to tell you that this is also a disclaimer of the university, the slide I had added with my email is not there, but you can easily Google me. So if you please, if you want the slides and if you want the references, there are many, many references, please email me, please contact me, and I'll be very happy to share everything I can share. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, for this insightful and very interesting talk. So let me see if there are already some questions. Well, while I wait for questions to arrive on the chat, Let me make a very general question. So I know the project, of course, as you told the audience, I was part of the project, so I know you and I know the project very well. And I know that something that you stressed a lot was that we need to communicate more with people working on other areas of linguistics. So for example, typologists, acquisitionists. So what exactly can they tell us formal syntacticians, and what can we tell them? Let's say, how can we communicate, or what are the topics or the ways that we can best communicate with them?
Well, that's a very good question. As you've seen, actually, in this the last attempt I have is like, first, I'm trying to understand what exactly is cognitive and what is just language, but also what can you find in every language. So is this topic a universal? This is not obvious, and this is not something that we can resolve by looking at two languages. Is topicality a universal concept? But if you have a universal in language, this doesn't mean that it is necessarily part of UG, or it is because of the faculty of language. It could be due to something else. It could be due to processing. It could be due to communication strategies. It could be due to many things. But what we actually need to know is whether this phenomenon, because we seem to think, okay, there are languages that don't have this because they cannot master, but this doesn't seem to be true. These people are speaking, these are the heritage speakers, and they can handle interface very easily. They can handle topicality very easily. They even use it as a strategy, so easy it is to handle. So I think, okay, you cannot draw conclusions about if it is only language, but you can definitely know whether something is there. If something is there always, it is always there, then it must be easy for people. It must be easy for language. It shouldn't be so rare. It must be. So in general, of course, you need to read other literature. You cannot just focus on only one language or on only one group, etc. This doesn't tell you much. You need to be as varied as possible and talk and explain and exchange and get feedback. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And this leads me to another question, which is about the parallels between the situations that you studied of microcontact and creoles. So we see that creoles pattern with, let's say, with Italo-Romance varieties in contact in the Americas much more than with other macrocontact situations, as you called them. So what exactly have they in common, and where can we see this commonalities?
Well, it is not so strong as we thought in the beginning. We thought it is basically like microcontact completely, but in fact, creoles do pattern with microcontact, in the sense that those languages, those creoles that have differential object marking, have it with topics. And those languages that are pro-drop, those creole languages that can do the pro-drop, do it with topics again. So basically, it seems to me that when creoles are formed, I don't want to know how, I'm not going to say anything about it, but when creoles are formed or when they emerge, the problem is the same in a way that speakers of dialects, of two dialects in contact have. The difference is so huge that you can't perceive, you can't identify the point of variation. You can't identify the local, unconsciously, of course, your grammars cannot identify what is the VP, what is the VP, what is the object, what is the subject, what is the structure of transitivity, how does it work? There are so many differences in these languages, typological, morphological, of all sorts of differences, that then speakers are at loss anyway. So this is what also Bickerton said, you basically resort to UG. And this is more or less what microcontact people do. They resort to what they have. So either you have too many differences or too little differences. Basically, you can see the strategy much more at work, strategy based on topicality and lexicality, than when you have very clear two systems that you can one-to-one compare and map to each other. Okay.
Thank you. I see that there is a question. I don't know who is the person that made the question about English. So you mentioned English as example of contact between a Proto language and a non-Proto language. So there was the example Italian and English, for example. And the person is asking if you think that there is a real possibility in principle of English becoming a Proto language. So
I think so. I mean, in theory, everything is possible, but I mean, it has been, I think that I think Manuela Pinto found that some Dutch, not English, but there were many more instances of pro-drop in this child Dutch than in contact with Italian than normal. So in principle, it can happen, but they have to be very specific and very, I mean, they have to be very precise situations. Normally, these are two languages that are very different and distant. So the strategy of inserting overt material is the easiest. You go with the because Italian is more complex in that you have both possibilities. You have the full pronoun, the full subject, and you have the pro-drop. So the full subject has one specific pragmatic use, and the no subject has another one. So you have a more complex system. English has one. You only have the subject and then you forget about it. This means that it's a simpler system. And if we think that change happens towards simplification, then you would expect actually that English doesn't become pro-drop. It should, because its pro-drop is very nice, but I don't think it will.
Okay, thank you. There's another question of, I don't know the name again, Andrea Menegotto from Argentina. He says that he came a bit late, so he's not sure that he understood your point about topicality. And his question is, would you say that something like a topicality drop parameter is at stake?
Yeah, no, not a topicality drop. So I see what you mean, and you're going one step further. So you want to formalize this. You want to say, how do you actually envisage this to happen in grammar at some point? So you have the subject, the clitic, that has become a pronoun. If it is a topic continuation, this means that there's a topic drop. So topic drop could be parametric. So it can enter I language. And that's a very good question. My feeling is, what I'm thinking now is that there is a relation between, so it is a matter of, we are thinking from several directions. The fact that there's a lot we need to consider, let's say 5 features, so inflectional features, etc. And those features that are more discourse feature in the sense of Miyagawa, they are sort of parasitic to the 5 features and to the features that identify a reference, let's say. So the moment you start shuffling these 5 features around, the discourse features start behaving differently. So I think formally it could still be not a macro parameter of topic, but it could be micro parameter determined by this, I will call it discourse feature, you can call it topic feature or whatever it is, that identifies a referent. But so you could still do it at the micro level rather than saying this has become a big, also because, you know, there's a lot of variation. I'm telling you things and it looks very beautiful, but in fact, speakers like Jan knows very well. Jan was in Argentina collecting the data. He is the one that collected our data. So he was doing the field work, and there were people that are switching between pro-drop and non-pro-drop in the same context in the same time. We go with, well, what it looks more, but it is still so. I'm always a bit hesitant with parameters because then it seems so absolute, so final. Then you set the parameter and then it has become like this. But what we see is a lot more optionality. So perhaps we have to consider features, macro feature of parameters, maybe that, yes. But that's a very good question. Thank you.
Yes, and indeed, the picture of heritage speakers in Argentina is very diverse. So you find a lot of variation. I can testify that. And well, on the other hand, there are languages like German, for example, where you have a topic drop. So there are languages where something like that is possible. No, it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the Asian languages, Japanese, Korean, etc. Their topic drop, Chinese, of course. But these are really systematic. They do it all the time. Whereas heritage is a little bit more delicate.
But it would be interesting going further this path.
Yeah, that's what we're thinking a little bit.
Yeah. Let me see. Oh, I see there's another question. Yes, from Giuditta Smith, University of Trento. She's saying that that was a fascinating talk. And she says you mentioned multi-gen families. Can you elaborate on what you found between generations, or if you have intuitions about microvariation in generational contact?
Yes, that's very interesting. So first we found very few families. So grandpa or grandma, then parents, and then children. We found 2 or 3, I think. One thing across generation, what we thought we would find much more systematic. So we thought, coming from diachrony, we think, okay, you find some optionality in generation 1 that's more or less resolved in generation 2, and it is established in generation 3, more or less. By generation 3, you have a system. But in fact, for instance, imagine the prodrop or these clitics, subject clitics that are pronominal or agreement. So they behave like pronouns or they behave like agreement. And you would say, okay, in the first generation, there's optionality. That's what we expected. Second generation, there's variation, more or less still. And in the third one, they decide it's either a pronoun or it's agreement. But in fact, it's not like that. So we find that first generation speakers have pronominal systems. Or then you have a second generation system that still have clitics, or they have both. So per speaker, things change, but per generation, so you see sometimes change already completed in the first generation, and you see the system still optionally switching between 2 systems in the second generation, and you see still in the third generation mixed behaviors. So perhaps because it is heritage speakers, perhaps there's a lot to say about the attitude of the speaker, and the fact that heritage speakers, I mean, the thing that can tell you most is spontaneous speech. And sometimes we find a lot of mismatch between spontaneous speech and elicited data, like Jan knows very well. Luckily, especially for subject clitics, you know whether, I mean, this is either you put them or not. So you can see them quite well. But heritage speakers tend to be a bit recalcitrant when they have to say, no, this is not fine. They tend to accept more. So when you say, okay, is this fine? They're not going to say no. So sometimes it could also be that the response is not very clear. When you give them to old elderly people, sometimes they just repeat the last one. So we checked every variable, we controlled everything, but sometimes they say both are fine. Sometimes they say, no, it's definitely the first sentence, and then they repeat it as the second. So the only one is the spontaneous speech. But in the spontaneous conversation, we did not find this order that we hoped we could find. It is much more complicated than we expected, more mixed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of other questions. The first one is from Marcus William Somerville. He's asking regarding your linking concepts of topicality and indexicality, does subject representation within library science serve as a parallel for understanding the signification of subject and their objects?
Can you please repeat it? I didn't understand. The subject?
Representation. Mm-hmm. If the subject representation within library science, maybe there's a typo here, serve as a parallel for understanding the signification of subjects and objects?
I don't quite understand the question, actually. I'm not sure what this question is about. Do you understand?
Maybe we can ask him if he can reformulate the question.
Yes, because I cannot understand probably.
Yeah, please, if you can reformulate your question.
More, because otherwise I don't know what to say.
Yeah, in the meanwhile, there's another one from Manuela Pinto, another member of the team. So she's asking, why should we resort to cognitive strategies, so topicality, exactly in microvariation? So when you have little differences between languages. I would rather expect to resort to cognitive strategies when the differences between languages are bigger.
Well, I mean, it's a matter. I mean, Manuela, she's asking these things because she has just joined the team. So it's not that she's asking to I mean, she's generally asking. And the question is, well, yeah, for creoles, that makes more sense, definitely. But the point is in microvariation, if you go back to Rothman and perceive typological similarity and the idea that you actually have transfer and you check grammars at the holistic level, so the complete typology, you think, okay, these languages are typologically similar, they have the same similar lexicon, similar grammar, etc. Then what you're saying is, well, when you look at say Napolitan and Spanish, you are looking through a net which is too wide, it is too big, so it doesn't, you can't distinguish the two, so you cannot again, just like in creoles, you can't perceive any distance. It is like if you were in contact with yourself, basically. So you don't know what to do, you kind of feel something, but you just go, and you should obviously just go diachronically, but in fact you are kind of elaborating on your own grammar. That's why I think you resort to this kind of cognitive strategies, and not to grammatical, very separate transfer, like from one structure to the other, you lose the differential object marking, you start using the marker for this for something else, etc. You can't perceive it. You can, of course, perceive something, but you can't quite pinpoint, because these are micro differences. So Abruzzese and Spanish are the same language, basically, aside from a little bit of the lexicon, etc. But it is really true. The only difference is like the third person pronoun for differential object marking. Then you have ser and estar is the same. You have a lot of them. So you say, okay, it's the same, but it's not the same. And then that's your mind, of course, not you explicitly. Yeah, that's what I think.
Manuela Pinto says, thank you, that's clear. We're still waiting for the other question, if it will arrive in another version. So in the meantime, maybe I ask you something very general. So this is a very innovative project. So just a very general question. What are the main challenges that you had to face, or in your experience, what do you think were the main? So tell us a bit more in general for the next people that will have such projects.
How much time do you have? You know, it is a question, because you know most of it, because you were there in the beginning, and the beginning was.
I do, but most of the audience don't. So I think this is an interesting question in general.
No, but I mean, there are several things, and we're actually writing papers, and with you too, about how you best collect the data from this kind of speakers. These are speakers that are mostly illiterate. Many of them are elderly, so they don't react well to tests from computers, etc. So imagine you need to elicit the data from a 85-year-old, 85-year-old lady who left, because that's the profile we look for, who left Italy 60 years ago, was in contact with, from, I don't know, Sicily, then she was in contact with Argentinian Spanish all her life. You have to ask her, elicit the data in Sicilian. First, which Sicilian do you pick? There's a huge microvariation in Sicilian. We picked our favorite Sicilian, Silvio Kruskina, but you know, there's a big microvariation. So that's the first thing. And she's going to perceive the distance. Which language do you talk to her with? Which language? I mean, we sent people like people that could use the contact language fluently, because we wanted to avoid the interference of Italian. But especially in the United States and in Canada, many immigrant heritage speakers go to school, Italian schools. So they use Italian, but Italian is another language, which shouldn't come into the picture. So that's the kind of problems you have. And also all sorts of interaction via computer, via machine, and the idea that when you talk about grammar, but even when you say, do you say this or that? You cannot ask too many questions because people get tired. You cannot ask too long questions because memory span is short. You cannot go there and double check because you have to take a plane the next day because there isn't an immense amount of time to meet them. And also so this is the practical, and then there's the bureaucratical problems of having to do field work in a country for a project sponsored by the ERC, the European Research Council, in countries that are not part of Europe. So we need certificates, we need approvals, or permissions for data exportation according to the rules that are fixed by the GDPR, which are the general rules of data protection in Europe. And we needed to ask the government of Brazil and the government of Argentina whether we could extract data, and the reaction was, excuse me, what is this that you want? And also they have to conform to European protocols, which is, again, excuse me, why would I have a sovereign state have to be conform with you? You need me. And so it wasn't easy, yes. And the designing the cloud sourcing, expecting that people actually understand zoom in, zoom out, that's not very easy. So it took us very long, about 2 years, to get the first data. But we got them, so that's good.
Okay, thank you. We didn't get the question again, so I think at this point we can thank you for this talk and for the fruitful discussion. And I say thank you also to the audience on behalf of Aberlin. And as you know, the series go on, so there will be a lot of many interesting talks in the next days and in the next weeks. And Roberta, if you have some final remarks. So
no, thanks again for this. This is really a fantastic initiative, and thank you, Jan, for your help and assistance as usual. Okay.